Good morning in the beautiful Galilee morning. Yes, we're in 100-year drought, they say, but it's still beautiful here. This is the time of year that I usually do a recap on what we saw since the barley was coming up out of the earth. And, in times past, I've just kind of like called it a recap of inspections. But really, I've realized what it is when the scripture talks about the fruit of the adamah, the fruit of the earth, it's really talking about the barley and the wheat. So really what I'm doing is I'm going to recap the fruit of the adamah, that phase of the calendar, that first phase of the calendar when the early feasts occur. There's a second phase, of course, towards the end of the calendar into the seventh month when the later feasts occur. But they're a different classification according to the scripture. The trees are never called the fruit of the adamah, including the grapes, which is called a vine tree. So it's very specific that it's kind of divided the year as we naturally see between what comes early and what comes later. So this is going to be a recap of just what occurred this year from my perspective, my thoughts about it. And then we'll put this away, fold it up, put it away till next year, and we'll turn our focus towards the grape. So it was on November 18 that the barley and the wheat had germinated. So anything that the barley has been through, the wheat has also been through. It's that the cycle of the wheat is longer to maturity than the cycle of the barley. But it was November 18th of 2024 for this calendar cycle that the fruit of the earth germinated. And then we had about, very briefly, we had about a 3.5 week break, and we had no rains. So you had tender grasses on the earth, and you had the hot Israeli sun, because if you've been around for a while, I've told you if it's raining, it's cold. If it's dry, it's hot. So for this period of time, those tender little stubbles of grass looking like grains sit out in the Israeli sun. Predominantly, it survived. Not all of it survived. I'm not responsible for where it survived, but it's very likely, especially at Ra'im, in that area where the drought was so severe this year, that anything that was seen early did not survive at all. So for 3.5 weeks, we went into a pause. The father said a pause because there was a need to intercalate this year. 3.5 weeks, the rain did not come. So it was on February 28th when I went out the first time to look at the earliest fields that I could find. There was potential near Partisana, but I could find literally no freestanding wild barley to evaluate. All the beautiful, beautiful, beautiful barley down there was mixed in with fields of domestic barley or wheat. I think it was actually domestic wheat. And so I can't use that. That's a field of basically domestic wheat that's being irrigated, more than likely being fertilized, all the things that could cause the barley to become mature more quickly. So it was in the north here where I went to the second most promising field, and I found that all the fruiting heads were empty. They either had not bloomed, they had just bloomed, or I'm sorry, they had either not bloomed, they were blooming, or had just bloomed. And there was no starch in the fruiting heads. So I went back on March the 10th. So you're talking about 10 days later. And I had really hoped that we were going to find Aviv barley at this time. However, the field was still very immature. Now, March the 10th was a potential for our first day of the month without intercalation. And I took a lot of criticism this year because I inspected so late. I mean, I inspected even after the first of the month, even, up until later than I normally do, just so because I knew I was traveling March the 18th, just so that we got a good, conclusive picture of what was going on. And that brings up something that I want to interject to the video as I'm watching this video and playing it back for edits. And that is, I'm not trying to reproduce what they did when there was a temple. Um, if that's the way you see what I'm doing, then you have the wrong person. What I'm actually doing as a single person living in Israel, watching the land from the time the grains come up until the time that they shed, is I'm trying to be very diligent and consider every aspect of what we've been given to deal with. So why would I watch that late in the year when I've already intercalated for the month? I would watch just to gain information and just so you as well could see what was happening on the land. And I do think that's fair for you to be able to see as long as I can, and as long as I'm like this time I travel, as long as I'm here. I do think that's fair for you to also see with your own eyes. So basically, the criticism was that I shouldn't inspect after the first of the month because the priests need time to tell the people to come to Jerusalem to celebrate the feast. But that's not my job. I'm not trying to stand in the place of a priest. I'm not trying to recreate what was happening in the first century. My premise for what I'm doing is we are thousands of years from where the people did this on an annual basis, and from actually knowing and completely understanding the process. My goodness, look what we learned this year. We learned about how the Zadok scale that was literally created for domestic wheat to know the fertilization and the fumigation when the best times were doesn't work with the wild barley. My goodness, look else we learned. We learned how long that wild barley can stand in the field. We learned so much this year. And if I had not been watching past the quota that someone wanted to give me, we would not have gained this knowledge. So my thing is that I'm a student on the land and I'm always learning, and I need to keep my eyes open because Elohim is always showing us something new every year, showing me something new. So yeah, if you're looking for someone that's trying to reproduce what they did in the first century or earlier, I'm not your person. If you're looking for someone to report to you what the land is doing, and then you want to cut it off at the new moon and not look anymore, you're welcome to gather the information and take it with you and be blessed and worship the Father and the Son the way that you see fit to worship them for these feast dates, for these Sabbath dates, because there's no ability to keep the feast even. So we just have the rest of the days, the Sabbath of the days left. It was very immature on the 10th. And that was the potential of the first day of the month. And what I found is that 50% of the much later growth, remember we had the 3 week break, and then even at that, we had periods of heavy rain without rain. So there was a much later growth that was completely empty in its fruiting head, the way that I had seen the earlier barley on the 28th. And the earlier barley I had seen from the 28th. Now, the 50% barley on the 10th that was empty was in the field on the 28th, and it looked like tall grass because the fruiting heads were not out. So now on March the 10th, the fruiting heads are out, and we also had the earlier barley that was still 50% at least of the field, probably more, of very wet dough. We had 2% of that 50% that was starchy. So we need 79 square feet of 100% of beef barley to make an omer. And this 2%, let me be clear, because there was a group that had a meltdown because they said there was a bee barley in the field. I don't know what they think. I think they think you destroy a whole field to collect what's there. I don't know. But you could not put the sickle in and harvest this barley. You know, Yeshua is very clear. He says, when the harvest has come, you put the sickle in. And this was not a situation where you could use the sickle. Then, the last time I went back on March 18th, I actually flew out that night. And the condition of the barley was what I would call aviv and harvestable aviv. The 2% that had been starchy earlier had dropped. Yes, it had dropped. Um, but again, it was not harvestable. We have seen about 3 years ago where we had an early flush of barley that was completely overgrown by a later flush of barley with fruiting heads. And it was down inside the taller, younger barley and could not be gotten to. So this is not the first year we've seen this phenomenon. Not for me, I've seen it before. So the 2% that had been starchy on the 10th was now shattered. That's not surprising. But the point was on March the 18th, there was enough barley that was aviv and approaching aviv in that field, in the early section of that field, that I knew that we were going to be fine before the intercalated Passover that was coming up on us. What else? The thing is that when I came into the barley world in Israel, we were in a 50-year drought. And what I saw this year was very much like we've seen in the past. Aviv of God is called this Leviticus 2 barley, where it talks about the condition is anything from, in King James, it says green ears to full ears of corn. So meaning that that spread exists in the field, that it's like I called, that it's a mixed maturity. So in times of drought, you're going to find mixed maturity. And this is what I was saying as I stood in the field. This is a call. Are you going to destroy, if you need 79 square meters and you're only getting 2% of the 79 square meters to be grains with starch in them, are you going to destroy a vast number of barley and sort out that it be barley? Or is it logical that you're going to give that time to mature so you can put, as Yeshua says, you put the sickle in? A harvest is a process of cutting. Whether we're harvesting a field or we're harvesting a first fruits, we need to be using a sickle. Let's see. So yes, it was very much like I had seen in years past when we were in a drought. This year they're calling it the 100-year drought. And we had 3 years of really good rain where we were spoiled. And it looked like this. The first flush came up. Apparently, there's probably always a first flush. I had just never noticed because of this mixed maturity situation that had happened before. But the first flush came up, and the first flush survived, and it was a portion of the field, and it was easily harvested. So we had that type of a situation for 3 years when we had a kinneret full of water, and plenty of rain on the earth. That appears because 10 years is not a lot of experience. That appears to be the normal condition in the years we have plenty of rain. And what we're dealing with now and have dealt with previously with this mixed maturity appears to be a normal condition when we have drought. And please do remember that this year we have had what they're calling a 100-year drought. Now, the final thing is about the wheat. I did go back to the United States and take a lot of therapy and did not watch the wheat as closely as I normally did. But I'm convinced when I look at what Yoel Halevi did. Oh, which reminds me of something. When we look at what Yoel Halevi did in his inspections, you saw him talking about the areas that were grazed out, Raim. I forget all the areas that were grazed out by the flocks. Um, and that's not surprising when you're dealing with, like he and I have said, very short barley. Those flocks are going to finish their normal grazing land early, and the Bedouins that graze their flocks are going to look for areas where they can continue to graze them. So that we saw so many of the areas that he would normally inspect and that I would normally inspect if I had not narrowed down my search to the earliest field in all of Israel that I would have normally inspected. It's not surprising to see that those fields were grazed out and eaten by the flocks. I'm looking around now, and I don't think they have anything left. Probably what they're doing at this point already is after this point, they will go into the domestic wheat fields and they will graze the stubble and anything that they can find that's fallen. So this is kind of normal. Although I will say, I have never seen the land grazed the way it was this year, where the flocks actually took the fields of wheat off the land completely. Um, Honestly, even back before I discovered the wheat, I've lived in this area, and there's never been grazing in the areas that they grazed when they grazed out the wheat. Again, consider the fact that everything was very short, everything was very sparse, and they had to go out further to get enough food for their flocks. So it brings up another point about Yoel Halevi. I had not actually looked at anybody else's inspection videos until last night. I said, well, let's go see, because some people were saying that the barley was shattering on March the 30th or February the 28th. I forget. I'm sorry, March the 30th in that genre or beginning of April. I actually forget the exact date. And so if Yoel said it was shattering 2 weeks ago, well, that was in time for a very early wave sheaf and that everybody else is wrong. So let's evaluate that. Let's evaluate that statement and let's evaluate what we saw from Yoel, because again, I only watched this last night. Where the barley had shattered 2 weeks early, it's not barley that I would use, and I'm going to tell you why. The first thing is it sits alongside a pavement, a road, and it's part of a um, previous older road. There's gravel there. There's high wires there. It is not a field. We are looking for I am looking for a field setting. I am not looking for roadside barley. If I wanted roadside barley, I could go here right outside the village on the way to my Tiberias Elite, and I could have pulled all the roadside barley I wanted. In fact, I know that that's a precursor to what the land will yield. Usually that roadside barley is a month early. And so what Yoel was looking at, and he does it every year, it's not where I go, I do not, for the reasons I've told you, was barley that wasn't in a true field setting. It was absolutely beside the road, beside the blacktop. And so all that concrete and asphalt act as a solar collector. It heats the barley that's near it up, causes it to mature more quickly. The same with the high wires that run along Highway 90 from one all the way to the Jordan Valley checkpoint. Those high wires, any farmer will tell you that the crops that are under the high wires either die or they ripen more quickly. The electricity affects them, they're shedding. And so when you couple that with the fact that we had a drought, it's not something I would use. I don't think it's a fair testimony of what the Father had caused us to happen on the land, because you have a lot of man-made interference there, whether it's the roads that man built or the electrical lines that he put up, they're high-power electrical lines. So that's my thought on the barley that would have shattered 2 weeks before the end of March or the beginning of April. Now, I don't feel because of especially now that I've watched Yoaha Levy's, and I'm going to put a link to his video down below in the description box. I don't feel now that I've watched Yoaha Levy's inspections that I could have done anything different to see the wheat. I don't think maybe I would have traveled past that and noticed it earlier, but there was nothing I could do to keep the animals out of there. I mean, flocks have got to eat, and the Bedouins are trying to make a living and take care of their family, just like everybody else. And even though the Israeli farmers will keep them in pens and keep them under roofed facility, their flocks, um, and feed them grains and feed them the baled hay, I'm sorry, the baled wheat that we harvest for fodder. The Bedouins don't. They graze the land. Don't have their animals in pole barns and shade. Their animals live in the elements, as very evident of the skeletal remains you'll find when you're walking through a field where a Bedouin grazes. So they're very dependent on what Elohim provides from the land. And there's absolutely nothing I could have done to bring you the type of wheat report, Immer wheat report that I've done in previous years. Um, I am quite satisfied. When I told you I went out of the wheat field area into areas of wheat that grew in vast amounts of barley and was able to find anything still standing. I am very satisfied when I've reviewed the year and found some wheat that we're exactly where we need to be. Um, and of course, people will be people, and I've been told that I've missed it for 2 years in a row, and that's okay. So what we saw in the wheat was fine. It's not always going to be like that because we intercalated. And think about it. We had about a 3.5 week pause. We didn't have a month's pause. That was not a full reset according to a lunar cycle. So of course, as we approach um, the wheat harvest and Shavuot, because the barley was intercalated and would then be ready ahead of the next new moon, the wheat, of course, would precede Shavuot just a bit. I'm just asking you to think logically. I know that there is been built kind of a mysticism around how things have to present themselves in this strict, orderly, like it can't be so early and you have to only have a first fruits on this day or whatever it is. But that's not following Yeshua. Has Yeshua ever put anything in your life that you've never faced before and said, are you going to follow me through this? Are you going to seek what I'm saying to you? Are you going to choose the path that I'm putting you on, or are you going to buck against it? And you're going to say you can't do that because. Well, that's very much like what we do with the calendar. In fact, if we understand that Yeshua is the promised seed, and that the seeds of barley on wave sheaf day represented his resurrection, those seeds that made flour, then we understand that we're following him when we look at the land. What the seed, the early seed, the earliest omer in a field, the field represents a world. When is that ready? When is that word ready? And does his first fruit look like 2% in a mixed field? Doesn't. It looks like something that he says where you put the sickle in and you harvest. And again, if we want to say it's a shame that 2% dropped and we didn't get to harvest it, we can. It's a drought. A drought's a curse. I don't have a problem with that. But you still have to present an omer and you still have to use a sickle, and it still has to come from the field to satisfy the things that are in the law and that Yeshua has said in his parables and in his writings of the New Testament. I think that's really it. The bottom line is I'm satisfied. I'm really satisfied. I see that this year is a harder test for most. And I agree that it's not a comfortable test, and some of you may feel dislodged and a little unsure, and that's fine. That's very fine. But if you're diligent in the scripture to understand everything that deals with the harvest and with the barley and the wheat, then you will need to understand that there is a criteria that we must follow of sickle harvestable omers of barley on the land to start the year. And then we need to be able, at the end of the time of the first fruits from the earth, we need to be able to present wheat leaven loaves. Isn't that interesting? We have an exact day for wave sheaf when the barley flour should be waved in the temple, the day of Yeshua's resurrection. But then it's a bit more open ended when we get to Shavuot because we need bread and we don't need wheat. We need to have taken the wheat from the field. It needs to be threshed. It needs to be winnowed. It needs to be ground into flour. And then a new sourdough wheat bread needs to be made from that wheat. And that is process. So I really, with everything we were given this year with the drought, having seen this kind of condition on the land before, if you've never dealt with I can see how a group could get off, especially relying heavily on the Zadok's scale. I understand that. I understand that that's been done for a long time by a few groups. And if they want to continue, that's fine. But it's not something that I will use because we did see this year with the drought and with a specific set of barley that had come up with the first rains, that the barley was literally standing with, at best, some of the fruiting heads having worm stage after 118 days. There was still no starch in any of that barley as we had tracked it because I was curious because I know what I was seeing on the land previously. So for me, I will not use that Zadok scale. I cannot say that this barley is X days old, so in X days we'll expect the Aviv. I can't do that. It doesn't work. And if others do, that's fine. That's fine. But this is my explanation for the year of what I saw as I went out on the land multiple times as one living on the land, as one watching from the first rain until we had an acceptable, harvestable, sickle harvestable amount of Aviv barley in a section of a field. That's my understanding of it. That's my explanation to you of what I saw. Just a brief recap, because I think sometimes when the pieces dribble in over time and we don't bring all the information together and present it in a single setting, you can get a little lost. It can be a little confusing maybe, but that's what happened. And I'm very satisfied with what I saw and reported to you, the decision I made. So we look to the grapes. Let's see what happens with the grapes. And on the grapes, there's no go-up feast. We're looking for an older variety of grapes. There's all kinds of designer grapes on the land of Israel. There's grapes under hot houses, not hot houses. It's like I forget what I can think of the Hebrew word, but the black canvas, not canvas, is like a black plastic to shade screen, under shade screen to protect it from wind or protect it from heat or protect it from insects, whatever the reason is, they plant the grapes under the shade screen. There's a lot of those. There's a lot of designer group grapes, especially in the vineyards, if the vineyards are making wine. So what we are looking for, and I actually have located a few places today where a group is planting the old grapes And we'll be watching that. It means I'll be doing some traveling as the season of the grapes approach. And we will continue on our journey this year with the biblical calendar and the ripening of the seven species.